Welcome to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case.
And I'm Ian Patrick.
On today's program, a federal judge strikes down the CDC travel mask mandate.
Meanwhile, the U.S. warns of a crippling Russian cyber attack.
And parents in Massachusetts are suing a school for pushing transgenderism on students.
Starting out with politics, in an effort to support domestic manufacturing, the Biden administration issued guidelines on Monday requiring all new infrastructure projects to use materials produced in the U.S. The 17-page guidance issued by the Office of Management and Budget states that in accordance with the new $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill signed into law last November, none of the funds made available for a federal financial assistance program for infrastructure, including each deficient program, may be obligated for a project unless all of the iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials used in the project are produced in the United States. The rule, which takes effect on May 14th, would apply to the construction of bridges, pipes, roads, and even broadband internet. The new rules will be enforced by the Made in America office, which aims to increase reliance on domestic supply chains and reduce the need for waivers through a strategic process. Now, the guidelines do permit federal agencies to grant waivers for this requirement under certain situations. By increasing reliance on American manufacturing, Biden hopes to create more jobs, ease supply chain issues, and lessen American dependence on China and other countries with differing national interests.
In other news, the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday rejected a bid by 4 Democratic-leaning states to lift a cap on federal deductions for state and local taxes that were put in place as part of the Trump administration's 2017 tax overhaul. The appeal was made by New York, Connecticut, Maryland, and New Jersey after a lower court threw out their lawsuit. The lower court held that Congress has broad authorities over taxes and did not violate the Constitution by placing a $10,000 limit on the amount of state and local taxes that individuals may deduct on federal income tax returns. The deduction limit, known as the SALT cap, was part of a Republican-backed federal tax law that slashed the corporate tax rate and implemented an income tax cut for individuals. Democrats had opposed that law, which was expected to reduce federal revenues by $1.5 trillion over 10 years. Capping the deduction also affects high-tax, often Democrat-leaning states, with New York estimating its taxpayers would pay $121 billion of extra federal taxes from 2018 to 2025.
And a federal judge in Florida has pending an appeal halted the federal mandate that requires travelers on airplanes or public transportation to wear masks. On Monday, U.S. District Judge Catherine Kimball Mazel ruled that the mandate was unlawful, as the CDC lacked the authority to make such demands. In a 59-page order, Mazel found that the CDC had overreached in its application of the Public Health Service Act. Her ruling reads in part, quote, "Within the past 2 years, the CDC has found the power to shut down the cruise ship industry, to stop landlords from evicting tenants who have not paid their rent, and require that persons using public conveyances wear masks. After rigorous statutory analysis, the court concludes that federal law does not authorize the CDC to issue the mask mandate." Soon after the announcement, all major carriers, including American Airlines, United Airlines, and Delta Airlines, as well as national train line Amtrak, relaxed these restrictions effective immediately. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the news was disappointing, but she did not offer a more detailed response beyond the administration's position that it still recommends to wear masks. The news was met with celebration on the right, however.
And that ruling over the CDC's travel mask mandate comes as businesses in the Philadelphia area have filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania State Court in an effort to overturn the city's reinstated indoor mask mandate. In their suit, the businesses argue that city health officials have usurped the power and authority of elected state lawmakers, as well as the State Department of Health and the State Advisory Health Board with this mandate. This suit follows the Supreme Court ruling in December that the state governor did not have the authority to require masks in Pennsylvania schools and child care centers. Meanwhile, the city's health commissioner, Dr. Cheryl Bettigol, has doubled down on her assertion that masks are the best response to the growing number of positive cases in the city, saying this, quote, "If we fail to act now, knowing that every previous wave of infections has been followed by a wave of hospitalizations and then a wave of deaths, it will be too late for many of our residents."
Meanwhile, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has acknowledged that progressive politics have played a role in the soaring crime plaguing cities across the U.S. on ABC's This Week program. Responding to former NYPD Commissioner William Bratton, who slammed progressive crime reform on a Bloomberg Businessweek podcast last Thursday, Adams admitted to major mistakes that have destroyed the trust in the police force. Take a listen.
The scales right now are tipped very heavily in favor of the reforms of the progressive left. Well-intended, some needed, but tipped too far. And what we have as a result is this growing fear of crime, this growing actual amount of crime, as evidenced in almost every major American city.
Major mistakes made throughout the years that destroyed the trust that the police commissioner is talking about. We have to rebuild that trust.
New York City Police Commissioner Keechant Sewell, who appeared alongside Adams during the same broadcast, said the city cannot lose sight of the victims of crime. Stephanopoulos also asked the mayor and Sewell about last Tuesday's subway shooting in Brooklyn, questioning whether there needs to be a better system in place to track these individuals. Adams responded to the host's question by saying that social media companies need to be more vigilant in monitoring harmful content posted on their platforms.
I think social media must step up. There's a corporate responsibility. When we are watching hate brew online, we can identify using artificial intelligence and other methods to identify those who are talking about violence.
Just for some context, crime in the Big Apple rose by a staggering 58.7% in the month of February compared to the same time period back in 2021, according to the latest NYPD statistics. The city has also seen a 40% increase in homicides over the past 2 years and the highest number of shootings in a decade.
And in Buffalo, New York, political figures, civic organizations, and military and civilian experts are working together to save a sinking World War II ship. As reported by Buffalo's ABC affiliate, the USS The Sullivans began taking on water and sinking in place at the Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park last week. The Sullivans, which is named after 5 brothers who all died on the same day during World War II, has a history of leaks and has needed hull repairs since at least February 2021. The military park has raised more than $1 million to complete those repairs, but the ship began taking on large amounts of water before they could be completed. Naval Park President Paul Marzello described the ship as a gift to Buffalo.
I want to make sure that we understand that the USS The Sullivans is a national historic landmark and that she is a gift to Buffalo, New York. And she represents the courage and the honor and the commitment of not only the 5 Sullivan boys who that ship is named after, but the thousands of veterans that have served this country.
On Monday, it was reported that a Navy architect and civilian marine salvage company had joined the effort to help save the ship. And up next, the FDA approves the first ever COVID-19 breathalyzer, and the U.S. warns of Russian cyber attacks. These stories and more after today's A Moment in History with Seth Udinsky.
Welcome back to A Moment in History. I'm Seth Udinsky. In tonight's episode, let's travel back 1,000 years to the medieval period. Now, in Christian history, there have been, for better or worse, countless splits and divisions between churches and denominations. Some of the splits have occurred over small issues, while others over the very core fundamentals of the Christian faith. Through it all, the church has remained by the sovereign and loving hand of God. But still, the splits have not been without drama. Let's go back and explore one of these in the year 1054 AD, in one of the splits that many consider to be the first and greatest. Church historians call it the Great Schism. Now, to capture the meaning of the Great Schism, we have to understand the nature of the church in Europe during the 11th century. At this time in history, there were really no denominations in Christendom. From Greece to the Atlantic Ocean, Christendom was under the rule of the papal powers in Rome, although it should be noted that the papacy and the secular monarchs always seem to be fighting for ultimate power, but perhaps that's another story for another time. But even though there was one ruling church, the East and West were beginning to look mighty different. The West, what we would call medieval Europe, had a distinctly Latin personality, while the East, at this time the Byzantine Empire, did not. Though they both claimed fealty to Christ, we see 2 different cultures emerging in the 11th century. 2 different languages, Latin and Greek, and 2 different rulers, the Pope in the West and the Byzantine Emperor in the East. The seeds for a fracture were in place, but it was not ultimately a cultural incompatibility that caused the schism. It was, in fact, a theological one. In July of 1054, clerical leaders from the East and West met to discuss these issues as they had often done in the centuries before. Now, the straw that broke the camel's back and caused the Christian church to fracture was an understanding of the nature of the sending of the Holy Spirit. Simply put, the church in Rome, or the West, believed that the Holy Spirit was sent by both the Father and the Son, while the church in Constantinople, or the East, believed that the Spirit was only sent from the Father. This is what caused the most impactful schism in Christendom outside the Protestant Reformation. Needless to say, the Catholic Church in the West and the Orthodox Church in the East have never reunited. Their practices and seats of power have remained distinct, and even in the fractures within the Western Church that have taken place, Western Protestant churches continue to maintain a theology that is distinct from the Church in the East. But despite this severe fracture, one great truth remains for Christians. The Church is still the Church, the bride of Christ. We can have great confidence in the fact that though the church has many flaws and there are wolves in the visible church, she is still beloved by Christ her Savior. Thanks so much for joining me once again for a moment in history.
I don't care what level of investor you are, whether it's the first thing you've ever done, whether you're young, you're just starting out, you don't have any money, you're just starting to put a few things aside finally, whether it's an IRA account, an investment account, whatever it is, that's irrelevant, the kind of account. But you have got to be sold out, convicted to be biblically responsible, because we are doing this for the kingdom. Yes, we're doing it for ourselves. God would want us to do it for ourselves, but inevitably, we are doing this to honor God, and we want to make sure that we honor God in all that we are doing. And you have to be convicted of that. You've got to be sold out for that. It can't be a passing emotion. It's got to be something that you're sold out for as you honor Him with the money that is His, that He is entrusting you to be the best steward of.
80% of the time a mother hears the heartbeat of her baby, she will choose life. Mission Preborn partners with life-affirming pregnancy clinics across the nation, equipping them with ultrasound machines, funding, training, and resources, making an eternal impact on both mothers and their babies.
You know, it's one thing to be outraged about abortion, but it's quite something different to take tangible steps to do something about it.
I think about the size of this reunion that we're going to have in glory with all these babies. You know, the numbers are beginning to get astronomical.
This year alone, more than 12,000 babies have been saved from abortion through the work of Preborn Ministries, and over 2,000 mothers have made a commitment to Christ.
And we need more and more people saving the lives of babies.
Be part of God's solution. Join us in saving babies from abortion. Go to preborn.org today and help us save lives and souls.
Welcome back to FISM News. I'm Samuel Case. Last week, the FDA granted an emergency use authorization for a breathalyzer test that can detect COVID-19. This new test could help speed up the detection of COVID and provide a more comfortable test for children and those with sensitivities. The device, called the Inspect IR, was originally developed as a potential roadside tool to screen for opioid or marijuana use, but a study found that it could also detect COVID-19 with almost 100% accuracy. The study included just over 2,400 participants, some of which showed symptoms of the disease. The test was able to identify 91.2% of positive samples correctly and 99.3% of negative samples correctly, with only reporting 4.2% false negatives. The breathalyzer was shown to have similar results with the Omicron variant as well. Inspect IR Systems, that's the company that makes these devices, believes it can produce about 100 breathalyzers each week, each of which can analyze about 160 samples a day. At this rate, the company estimates that they could increase testing capacities by about 64,000 samples a month.
And now let's move to some international coverage, where Russian forces unleashed a massive artillery and rocket barrage in eastern Ukraine overnight along a front of more than 300 miles in what Ukrainian officials called a new phase of the war to take control of the Donbas region of Ukraine. Russia's enhanced ground offensive is currently focused on the Donbas regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, as well as neighboring Kharkiv. Moscow reported that it struck numerous military targets in eastern and central Ukraine, including command headquarters, ammunition depots, and Ukrainian troops and vehicles, but these claims could not be independently verified. Russian forces were also able to gain control of the city of Kreminna in Luhansk following intense street fighting on Monday night. Luhansk Regional Military Administrator Serhiy Haidai said the Russians just started leveling everything to the ground before advancing into the city. Ukrainian defenders were forced to retreat, Haidai said, adding that they will regroup and continue fighting. Ukraine's National Security Council Secretary Oleksiy Danilov said that apart from Russia's advances overnight, Ukraine's defensive line remains intact elsewhere in the region. A senior U.S. defense official also said on Monday that Russia now has roughly 50,000 to 60,000 troops in eastern and southern Ukraine alone.
At the same time, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has issued an urgent Shields Up alert warning that Russia has developed a new generation of dangerous malware that could cripple international systems worldwide. Industrial systems worldwide, to be exact. U.S. cyber officials said Russian state actors have already been probing weaknesses in some of America's most critical systems. CISA Director Jen Easterly explained, quote, "We are seeing evolving intelligence about Russia planning for potential attacks."
We have to assume that there's going to be a breach, there's going to be an incident, there's going to be an attack. I think we are dealing with a very dangerous, very sophisticated, very well-resourced cyber actor. And that's why we've been telling everybody consistently, shields up. What does that mean? It means assume there will be disruptive cyber activity and make sure you are prepared for it.
Easterly has asked industry leaders to share information with the government to defend against cyber attacks and is urging U.S. organizations, no matter the size, to install software updates and use multi-factor authentication on computers and phones.
Meanwhile, the Israeli military said that it shot down a rocket fired from the Gaza Strip on Monday, marking the first of such an attack in months as tensions over Jerusalem's Temple Mount area have grown. No Gaza faction claimed responsibility for the launch, which followed warnings by Hamas Islamists of reprisals for Israeli defense efforts around the Temple Mount. Within hours, Israeli airstrikes hit camps used by Hamas and another Gaza faction, at least according to Palestinian sources, and reportedly no one was hurt in these strikes. Since Friday, the Temple Mount has seen confrontations between Palestinian stone throwers and Israeli riot police. Palestinians accuse Israel of encroaching on Al-Aqsa Mosque during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Israel says Palestinian protesters seek to disrupt Muslim prayer for political ends and to prevent Jewish visits in celebration of the Passover. In Washington, meanwhile, the State Department said U.S. officials engaged in phone calls with Israelis, Palestinians, and Arab representatives over the weekend in an effort to prevent an escalation of the Jerusalem tensions.
Meanwhile, in China, according to two people familiar with the matter, Shanghai has set a target to stop the spread of COVID-19 outside of quarantine areas by Wednesday, which would allow the city to further ease its lockdown and start returning to normal life as public frustrations continue to grow. The target will require officials to accelerate COVID testing and the transfer of positive cases to quarantine centers, at least according to a speech by local Communist Party officials dated on Saturday that was seen by Reuters. Frustrated Shanghai residents have taken to social media to vent their anger at local authorities over difficulties sourcing food, lost income, separated families, and poor conditions at central quarantine centers. Tensions have on occasion erupted into public protests and scuffles with police. Meanwhile, the BBC reports that China has confirmed 3 COVID deaths since lockdowns began last month, marking the first time China has acknowledged a COVID death in the country since March of 2020.
And finally, the 3 days that comprise Good Friday through Easter on Sunday were marked by violence in multiple Swedish cities as riots erupted after members of Stram Kurs, a far-right Danish political group, burned Korans in the streets. According to a report by the BBC, more than 40 people, at least 4 of whom are minors and 26 of whom are police officers, had been injured in the event. The violence began in the cities of Linköping and Norrköping when members of the Islamic religion began lashing out violently at the sign of disrespect shown to the Muslim text. NPR reports that Swedish law enforcement believes the violence was caused by gangs who have a reputation for targeting police. Numerous Muslim-majority nations have officially protested the burning of the Quran, but did not find it necessary to decry the violent reaction. Strom Course, which translates to tight course or hardline in English, is effectively a single-issue party and runs primarily on an anti-Islamic and anti-immigration platform in the nation of Sweden. And that wraps up our international coverage, But stay tuned for an update on the lawsuits against Alex Jones and InfoWars, as well as a look into what some experts are calling the triple peak workday. And we have other coverage, including what's going on between Elon Musk and Twitter. So you don't want to miss that as soon as we get back from this next break.
Our faith and values shouldn't be compromised by the way we invest. Our faith and values that we share should guide us in the way that we invest. Make sure that you are investing in companies whose policies and practices align with pro-life, pro-family values. Visit thetimothyplan.com or call for more information. Advance the kingdom in the way that you invest.
My name is Muskan. My age is 8 years old. I got a beautiful life from God. I like Jesus because He has saved my life.
Welcome back to FISM News. Once again, I'm Samuel Case. As Ian mentioned before the break, Elon Musk took a swipe at the board of Twitter on Monday after the social media company adopted a poison pill to protect itself from his $43 billion cash buyout offer. Musk tweeted this, quote, "The board's salary will be zero if my bid succeeds, so that's $3 million a year saved right there." Continuing his attack against the company, Musk had launched a poll on Thursday asking his 80 million followers if taking Twitter private at $54.20 a share should be up to shareholders, not the board, to which a large majority responded yes. Later, the Tesla CEO also tweeted "Love Me Tender," which is a reference to the Elvis Presley song, after Twitter adopted a plan to sell shares at a discount to prevent any attempt for shareholders to amass a stake of more than 15%. Just for some context, Musk currently has a 9.1% stake in the company. Meanwhile, in a series of tweet replies, co-founder and former CEO Jack Dorsey called out Twitter's board on Saturday, saying it's consistently been the dysfunction of the company.
Meanwhile, InfoWars, the business formed by political commentator Alex Jones, has recently filed for Chapter 11 reorganization in a bankruptcy court. During his Monday program, Jones claimed that neither he nor InfoWars is technically filing for bankruptcy, but he said the reason they filed under Chapter 11 is to have a federal court look at his monetary situation to disprove claims against him and his business of hiding assets.
We have less than $3 million cash, and we need that money to buy future product to be able to operate. So I'm essentially making no money, which is fine. The whole purpose of this place was not for Alex Jones to make a bunch of money. The bankruptcy for my affiliate companies is designed to pay all of my creditors in full. Alex Jones, yours truly, gave up all rights to his membership interest in the debtor's bankruptcy to a trust created to hold that interest and backstop payments and claims. Number 4, I'm confident the federal system has the tools and experience to fairly deal with the resolution of these claims.
The creditors that Jones references are some of the family members of the children and staff killed in the 2012 Sandy Hook school massacre back in Connecticut. These families sued Jones in Texas and Connecticut courts for defamation when he claimed that the shooting was faked by the government to try and assert more gun control laws. In November of last year, FISM News reported that Jones was found liable in all of the cases, meaning a jury is now able to decide how much he owes to these families. Amidst the proceedings in these cases, a separate lawsuit filed more recently against Jones by some of the Sandy Hook families accuses him and InfoWars of hiding assets. Jones claims that all of the lawsuits against him aren't actually for money purposes, but to try and shut down his operation. The bankruptcy filing from Jones' side will put the civil lawsuits against him on hold as the business reconfigures its finances.
And speaking of lawsuits, Johnson & Johnson said on Monday it agreed to pay $99 million to settle claims by West Virginia that it helped fuel an opioid addiction crisis in the state, in a move that removes the company from an ongoing trial that began earlier this month. West Virginia is still pursuing claims against Teva Pharmaceuticals and Allergan for their alleged role in the crisis, with the state accusing the companies of causing a tsunami of addiction. West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey said on Monday that the settlement would allow the state to quickly fund programs intended to address opioid addiction and its fallout in the state. The state previously reached a $26 million settlement with Endo International, which had also been a defendant in the ongoing trial. This comes as J&J finalized a nationwide $5 billion opioid settlement in February, which largely resolved state and local government opioid lawsuits against the company.
Meanwhile, parents of middle school students in one Massachusetts school system filed a lawsuit against their local administration, alleging that they encouraged children as young as 11 to experiment with gender identity without parental knowledge or consent. Two sets of parents at Barrage Middle School filed a joint lawsuit in federal court last Tuesday after students were encouraged to change names and were affirmed in a gender identity change without the knowledge of the parents. The lawsuit names the Ludlow School Committee, the interim superintendent, a former superintendent, the school principal, a school counselor, and a former librarian as defendants. Like New Jersey's transgenderism stance, Massachusetts urges schools administrations to discuss nonconforming gender identity with a child before actually informing parents. According to some of the facts of the lawsuit outlined in the 57-page brief, the actions included having children make a video of their new identities and even hiding children's pronoun changes when in communication with their parents.
Meanwhile, in an interesting development from the pandemic lockdowns, Microsoft researchers found that with the rise of working from home has come the rise of what they're calling the triple peak workday. Typically, workers have had two productivity peaks in their workday, one before lunch and one right after. However, according to Microsoft, the pandemic's work from home model caused many to have a third peak between 6 and 8 p.m. The research found that employees who were tending to children in the afternoon pushed off their work and made up for it in the evening, while others found they were better to optimize their flexibility by changing up their hours, and others just found a better environment at night. One researcher observed this third peak is different from the other two peaks because it raises the question, is this about flexibility or is it about work encroaching on someone's personal hours, adding this, quote, "Any way you slice it, the boundaries between office hours and everything else became thinner this past year and a half."
And finally in sports, Olympic champion Perez Jepchirchir won the women's Boston Marathon on Monday as fellow Kenyan Evans Chebet dominated a stellar field to win the men's race. With 1 mile remaining, Jepchirchir ran alongside Ethiopia's Ababel Yashana until crossing the finish line just 4 seconds ahead. Jepchirchir adds another win to her record after placing first in New York's November race, finishing in Boston with a time of 2 hours, 21 minutes, and 1 second. Meanwhile, Chebet picked up his first major victory in 2 hours, 6 minutes, and 51 seconds, securing an 18-second advantage over 2019 winner Lawrence Chirono with 1 mile left. The race started in Hopkinton in perfect conditions as the world's oldest annual marathon returned to its traditional spring date for the first time in 3 years.
It's a really good sign that things are finally returning to normal.
I think
really
so.
Good news.
I think so, yeah.
And with that good news, that actually is our program for today. So thank you so much for joining us, and please visit FISMnews.tv for more content.
And for any updates until next time, you can follow us on social media at FISM News on any of the major platforms, or you can download the FISM app right to your smartphone. Thank you so much. God bless, and we hope to see you next time.